Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. In this episode, Lily Rains returns as a guest co-host, and we talk to a singles advocate, Christina Diane Campbell, about the historical and present-day differential benefit that married people receive over single people. We discuss common anti-singles rhetoric. For example, "You're so great, why are you still single?" and how this type of rhetoric fails simple tests of logic. We talk about how singleism fails to reach the type of oppression that other isms do, such as racism, sexism, or heterosexism. Yet the conversation reveals how oppression, whatever its form, occurs for similar reasons and should be resisted as a whole. Recognizing the prejudice against singles is largely overlooked or even commonly accepted. And so we talk about some of the ways that non-singles can support their single friends and family members. If you stick around to the bonus material, you'll learn about a remarkable single from the 1800s, a conversation that highlights how far we solos have advanced. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Christina Diane Campbell. Christina is co-founder of the singles advocacy blog, onely.org. She has written about marital status discrimination for Atlantic.com and PsychologyToday.com. Her extended essay, "And Sarah, His Wife," about mental health, misogyny, and colonial America won the Michigan Writers Cooperative Press Chapbook Contest, which might be the longest award-winning name I've ever heard. Her interests also include disability rights, sailing, yoga, linguistics, and true ghost stories. She lives in Northern Virginia with her infrared sauna, such a solo thing to have, and 3 semi-geriatric cats. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. And we're joined by a return guest co-host, Lily Rains. Lily is a storyteller, arts educator, crafter of needlework, and maker of homemade ice cream. Though solo, Lily loves to be part of an ensemble with a shared goal, be it on the softball field, in an escape room, or getting a play, movie, or TV show made. Lily made her first appearance on Solo episode 8, which is one of my favorites, Dating Friends and Sleeping with Strangers, the Valentine's Day edition. Welcome back, Lily, and you're joining us from a new location. You have just moved to...
I just moved to Minneapolis.
Yes, so you're now in Minneapolis, and you have left me behind here in Los Angeles. So let's start. Christina, I want you to talk about how you came to co-host a blog on singles advocacy. Like, why do Lily and I need an advocate such as you?
Well, so actually, I give most of the credit to my co-blogger, Lisa Arnold, because it started years ago. We were both coming out of bad breakups, and we were talking on the phone, and Lisa said to me, I've noticed that when I read articles about being happy as a single person, they always have the ultimate point that you should be happy as a single person so that your happiness will bleed out of you and attract people to you so you can become unsingle. And Lisa said this, and she was like, that just feels wrong to me. And we started talking about it. And she said, we should have a blog where we can sort out our thoughts on this. And that's how Onely started. It was really a lot to do with her insight. And, we were already in our 30s at that point, and we had a lot of internalized singlism. And it just boggles my mind that I got to that age and I was still thinking, I love being single, but I must be a complete weirdo because I love it so much. There must be some kind of deep psychological issue that I have. And I just thought, I'm going to just accept this deep psychological issue that I have. I'm okay with having it. I don't know what it is or how I got it, but that's the way I am.
I like this idea of I'm not crazy. The world is crazy.
Right. But it took me, like I said, into my 30s before I realized I wasn't crazy. The world was crazy. And I credit Lisa with that. And I credit Bella DePaulo with that as well. Of course, she's very well known in this community.
Yeah, she was super early to this, not only as an advocate, but also as a researcher, dispelling a lot of the mythology. And she shows up in episode 2 of Solo, where I'm sure we'll revisit some of the topics. But okay, so I get that, but you've moved it from this working through yourself to an advocacy issue.
Yes, because, back in the day when we read Bella's book, Singled Out, and she was flagging issues like Social Security and inheritance taxes and those institutionalized, those laws and those regulations that are really written into law that say single people are less than married people. They can't have this right. They can't have that right. That was
Lily's like shaking her head really violently right now.
Right. And when I started reading Bella's work and I started thinking, my Social Security really is just going to go back into the system. If I die, I can't leave it to my close friend. I can't leave it to Lisa. I can't leave it to anybody. Started thinking about those things. And I really just sort of leapt from doing socio-cultural critiques of singlism right into, we've got to change these laws. We have to. And the first step into changing them is to have a dialogue about them. And when I started trying to talk to my friends about it, say, you know what, there's over 1,000 laws in just the federal code, not even talking about state codes, right? Over 1,000 laws that are related to your marital status and usually privilege people who are married. People just didn't really engage with me on that. And I struggled to have that dialogue with people because I think singlism, and especially institutionalized singlism, like the discrimination in Social Security and tax law, is so insidious. People just take it for granted. And when you try to say, look, this is kind of unfair, they come up with all sorts of arguments about why it really should be married people. No, they should get all these privileges.
So maybe we step back and like assume for a listener who the average listener might obviously is kind of comfortable with their singleness or seeking to be comfortable with their singleness, but they're not as aware of the marital privilege that exists. So maybe give us some of your greatest hits of singlism that you have encountered and researched.
Well, and again, I want to give credit to Bella for starting me on this path. The one thing Lisa and I did do was we thought, how much money are we actually losing because of these discriminatory laws in the tax code, in Social Security, housing discrimination? How much money do we actually lose? And so we did some math, and it was very informal math, but we sort of tried to look at a couple hypothetical characters who earn a average amount, a little bit average and a little bit high average amount of income in Virginia. And we looked at examples in the federal code of discriminatory laws and sort of crunched the numbers to figure out how much these hypothetical people would be losing compared to their married counterparts. And the higher of the two incomes, which is still a very moderate income for the state of Virginia, that hypothetical person lost at least $1 million based just on the handful of laws that Lisa and I chose to crunch the numbers on.
Okay, so that might be something like if one of the partners dies, the other gets their Social Security benefit kind of thing? I see.
Yes. I guess I'm sort of leaping ahead a little bit. Basically, of those 1,000 laws, 1,000 plus, the main ones are Social Security, inheritance taxes, all sorts of tax laws that benefit married people. I think in Lisa and my math calculations, we also looked at housing discrimination and accounted for that.
What do you mean by housing discrimination? How does that work?
So there was, I don't have the numbers here in front of me, but we had read there was a certain figure that single women, I think, spend a certain amount more on housing because they can't share rental costs or share mortgages, what have you. So we took that number that we got out of this article and extrapolated from there. And I can't actually remember what the number was, but it was significant.
Fine. In principle, I get it.
Right.
Yeah, I see.
And just for random example, recently in my own life, relative of mine died and left me some money out of his IRA. And because I was not his spouse, I did not have the option of leaving it in the account and letting it accrue until my retirement. I have to take it out within 10 years, which is okay. But again, if I had been his wife, would have gotten that little bit more time for the money to accrue. So.
Yeah, it's fun is some of these things are really big. There's like a bunch. I think I was looking through your blog and I came across this elsewhere through Bella's work and elsewhere is like, if you're in the military and you get married, you get a raise.
Yeah, the military is extraordinarily problematic on marital status discrimination. And I am not in the military, so I really can't speak to it too much. There are other people who are more familiar. Yeah. But yeah, my understanding is it's a big issue.
But even like some of them they're very minor, but I think they're illustrative. So Spotify recently came out with a special called Spotify's Premium Duo. And I'm going to read the copy that Spotify sent out with this. Spotify's Premium Duo is designed for audio-loving pairs living at the same address. Each individual gets their own premium account under one plan, in addition to unique benefits for couples for just $12.99, or the market equivalent per month. So if you're a single person, that account costs $9.99 a month.
But in fairness, I want to just point out that there's a lot of people who have roommates and that Spotify is definitely a millennials platform. So I read that very much as young people living together get to save money.
It says unique benefit for couples.
They said couples once, right? And I did wonder when I was reading that email, it was like yesterday we got it. I was wondering if at some point somebody did a search for couple and then replaced it with duo. It just read to me initially as very much speaking to the millennial generation that is a lot of roommates. Because as long as you're listening from the same location, right? That's
hold on. I don't buy that because they don't give you an option for 3 people to sign up.
Sure, but there's not. But who's to say? They do make it a duo, right? But they don't talk about marriage. So this probably to them is speaking more to people who are cohabitating and don't want to put labels on it or don't believe in marriage. I do think it's very much speaking to a younger generation that don't necessarily have the same awareness of the jabs that they're getting for not being married yet.
And we might disagree.
That's my pitch. I'm just devil's advocate. Also,
that's good. I'm
Christina,
glad.
I'm really sorry for your recent loss.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think we glossed over that too soon.
Thank you also for that.
Okay.
That's
Thanks.
very nice of you.
Yeah.
That's very nice. So what are some of the lesser known ones besides Spotify?
Can I add one?
Yes, please.
Well, I've literally just moved here And being at IKEA just a couple days ago, when I was at IKEA when Peter texted asking, "Do you want to co-host again?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" Also, I'll take 3 of those mirrors
and some meatballs.
And meatballs. I'll take. IKEA is the epitome of like, one of those looks not so great. 3 of them. Oh, now that's decoration. Anyways, so I'm at IKEA and filling up my basket. Proud to be a solo and gonna decorate my new space. And I'm overflowing in my cart. So now it's time for me to check out. And the woman who's checking us out is already moving pretty slowly. And I'm the solo taking every little item out on the conveyor belt. And nobody helps you bag at IKEA. If you haven't been in a while, just a reminder, nobody helps you bag. And everybody behind me is coupled up. So eventually, all million things that I'm purchasing are paid for, and I'm completely alone trying to figure out how to get all the things back into my cart, and people are frustrated because I'm clearly in their way, and everybody else in line has 2 people to hold their stuff. And I'm paying, even if it's just 5 cents, for an extra bag so that I can carry my shit back to my car and continue living my solo life. So it might only be 5 cents or 10 cents or $2 for one of those huge IKEA bags. But like, it's still more expense on the solo. And I'm going to a house that's going to have the same, essentially the same amount of space or whatever it might be. It doesn't matter, but you're already being discriminated against. And if I may, I would pitch that per person, a solo puts more into the economy in the first place. So the fact that there is not an equivalent of a tax write-off at the end, solo people can own a house, which means they're paying the property taxes. They can have kids, right? You're paying all the same things, but for the most part, a solo person might be going out a little bit more, stimulating the economy in a different way. The solo women who are looking for places to live are paying more because I need a safe space. I moved into a new city that has completely different weather, and part of my budget had to include secured parking, which is $100+ a month in this city, especially when you're dealing with winter and sub-zero.
I'll add one. I mean, I'll be honest. I think all of these are very real differential benefits. They don't tend to bother me that much, but there's one that does, and I'll tell you about it in a moment. The reason it doesn't bother me is because solos tend not to have children. That's not always the case, obviously, but they tend not to have children. And so any benefit that married people have, they give up the moment they start to have children. Because children are just so damn expensive that I'm just like, well, all right, you're screwed. And so, like the cost benefit analysis helps even it out a little bit. But the one that bothers me is obviously property tax. And the idea is that I pay property tax. If you own a home, you pay property tax. And much of the property tax goes to supporting school systems. And so that's a benefit you realize it in an abstract way that educating young people is good for society and good for for the city and good for the world and all those things. And I'm happy to help in that way. But it's a differential benefit. So married people don't pay additional property tax when they have children.
But they take up more room.
Yeah. And, but they're getting the benefit, which is, and we're realizing this in a COVID world, and no one wanted to admit it, but now they're starting to admit it, is that schools don't just educate children. It's childcare. And so now you have children and then you get free childcare for those kids. And frankly, I feel bad for parents who are having to homeschool and so on. That's hard to do. So, Christina, what is your reaction as you hear us talking about these things as someone who has thought about this 1 million times more than I have?
At least.
Oh, I think they're very, very valid gripes, shall we say, or very, very valid concerns. And, like Lily's example of the bag cost and the couples lining up behind her. Okay, it seems like a small thing, but those small things add up. So I think both of your comments are really valid. I just, my own example, because Peter was asking for random examples of the quote unquote smaller things. is when Lisa and I were looking at the federal code, looking at all of the laws that mentioned spouse or marital status. One of the laws that we flagged was the stalker law, where taxpayer money goes toward protection for someone if they're being stalked. You know, I guess they can have a squad car outside or what have you. I don't know. But that the person, the stalkee, gets protection. So do the people in their nuclear family, I believe, or a romantic partner. But anyone outside of the nuclear family or this romantic partner seems like, you know what, they don't get the stalker protection. They aren't in that little circle of people who get protected against the stalker, which I just thought, there's another random example. Now, hopefully I'm never going to be stalked. It's not ever going to impact me, but it just is, like Peter said, illustrative. And when you add up all these little random things, you begin to get a kind of disheartening picture.
These are also, no offense, these are stupid people who never watched one movie in the 90s. Where like the bad guy follows the roommate every time. Every time.
Right.
Stupid lawmakers.
And that's the thing, I don't know how to fix these laws. I would like the dialogue to get big enough so that people who are in a position to fix them, like lawmakers, people who are smarter than I am on these topics, people who are smart in tax law, people who are smart on just lawmaking in general, and could maybe engage on giving some ideas of how to fix these discriminatory issues.
Yeah, I mean, how dare to make a prediction. I don't like to make predictions. But
Peter!
Ooh, let me go. Which is, I think that this focus on family has the potential to change with the change that'll happen in demographics. So at this point, 28% of households in the United States have a single person in them. That number is projected to grow for a variety of reasons, in particular, delaying marriage, and then also just younger people's are losing faith in marriage. There's predictions. I think Pew Center has a research project that suggests the percentage, I can't remember exactly what it is, but like 40% of millennials are never expected to marry or something like that. I'm not sure it's that high, but in any case, maybe it's 25%, up from like 10 or 14% historically. Don't get my numbers, just to get the gist of my numbers, I apologize. And so what'll happen is there is votes in single people. There is money to be made from single people. So Ellen Byron is a writer for the Wall Street Journal. She's written a few articles about how corporations are starting to wake up and recognize that people like Lily have special needs in the marketplace. Not those kind of special needs.
I'll take anything. You want to give me something? I'll take it. I'm learning how to receive.
Special considerations. So even some things like sizing of eggs and bread, and the big toilet paper roll that came out. The big roll is bought more often by single people because they have smaller spaces and they don't have as much storage and so on. And so I think even smart churches are recognizing that they've been alienating single people for a long time, and the smart ones will welcome them into the flock, so to speak. And so I think that the demographic changes are going to help nudge some of this along. And then obviously there's people like us who are unapologetic about being unattached and are being vocal about it and are building community and a conversation around something that otherwise you would just think, am I crazy for thinking the way I do, versus the world is crazy for thinking the way it does.
I've got another expense to add for women specifically.
Yeah.
Fertility, freezing your eggs, because that is also so ingrained in the female experience that even when you're in a space where you're pretty sure you don't want to pursue motherhood, I made the choice not to pursue, although I do have family that was like, Lily, you just don't know. You never know. You just got to do it. And I was like, I'm exposing my body to that unbelievable amount of hormones, and I'm paying how much money for all of that, and for the storage, and for this, all for a maybe. And there are other women who I now know at 40 are like, damn it, I spent so much money doing that. I could have owned a house by now.
And do you have a sense of the price to do that? Because I think the price of, if you're a man who's thinking about getting a vasectomy or something to freeze your sperm, it's like $750 to $1,000 a year. I think, give or take, because I did a bunch of research for this. I have a vasectomy, or I have a prostate episode on Solo. It's a weird out of the blue one, and so I looked into what the cost of that would be because I was curious about it. In part because my guest, who's a urologist, had this really interesting take on vasectomies, which is if you're thinking about freezing your sperm, don't get the vasectomy. And he had a whole bunch of reasons, one in which was the incredible expense that comes from, and the limited amount that you can store and all that kind of stuff. But my guess is it has to be at least the same amount of money.
Oh, it's 10 times as much starting.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
In order to do like a round of hormones and then the surgery just to remove the eggs at the exact right time, I've heard it starts around 10 grand.
Okay.
And then you're housing your eggs.
Got it. Okay. That makes good sense. So, Christina, let's get into this anti-singles rhetoric. I think that's something that you've thought a lot about. So there's the sort of written laws, tax codes, and so on. But then there's also the conversations that people have with singles and the language they use and the assumptions that they make and so on. And I always talk about this as we live in a world where at every Thanksgiving dinner, there's one of us. And that person is subjected to this rhetoric. And they feel alone because they're the only person at the dinner. But if there's one person at every dinner, there's actually a big community. And that's part of this podcast and part of your blog is to talk to those folks. But what are some of the devices that sort of anti-solo people use?
Yeah. So, I'll just give you one example. A super, super common example I'm sure we've all heard is, you're so amazing, you're so smart, you're so funny, why are you still single? Very, very common to hear that. That's just one of many super common statements that, might feel bad to a single person, but they don't necessarily know why it feels bad, or can't articulate in the moment why it feels bad and why the other person shouldn't have said it necessarily. And Lisa and I were talking about this phenomenon and how, as single people, sometimes we feel put on the spot. We don't know exactly what to say, or we don't know exactly how to articulate that singlism exists. And we were going through these little microaggressions like, oh, you're so great. Why are you still single? Or, oh, don't worry, you'll find someone one day. And we were thinking, each of these is an example of a logical fallacy. So Bella gave us a venue and let us write in her Psychology Today column. We wrote about these microaggressions, and for each microaggression, we gave an example of a specific logical fallacy that was tied to that microaggression, just as a way to give people sort of something hard to hold on to when they're being bombarded with these microaggressions that feel bad, but they
hard to hold on to during microaggressions.
So yeah, there's the example I just gave, which is, you're so great, why are you still single? And that one, just to give an example, that's the appeal to flattery fallacy. That's the literal name of that logical fallacy. And basically what it means is that the argument assumes that because the person has said one flattering thing, the rest of their argument must also have a degree of truthiness to it.
I see. Yeah.
And these are rhetorical devices that go back like to the days of the Greek philosophers, and they would.
Yeah, the rules of logic and so on. Yeah, that's wild.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your response when someone tells you that? What do each of us respond with that to that?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, well, I know what Christina says. She's like, and that's the...
That would be the appeal to flattery fallacy that you are using right now. But I'm never that fast, though, even though, I wrote this article and Lisa and I went through all the fallacies and articulated all the fallacies in relation to these random microaggressions we were getting. I still can never remember when someone hits me up at the dinner table, like to use Peter's example. I just kind of freeze.
Peter, what do you say to that?
I don't get that anymore. I'm too old. Well, part of the reason I'm so amazing is because I'm single. I have all this time and energy and freedom to do all these great things. So why would I want to ruin this by partnering up?
My response, were you asking? Yeah.
Please.
My response is I'm kidding, gosh, you're so great. Why are you still single? I said, I am so great, aren't I?
That's perfect. I give up mine and I'm going to use yours.
I feel like I should, or at least I should have a little note card that I carry around with you guys' responses on it so I can refer to it in the moment.
Oh, if you want to brainstorm, let's go for it. I love it. I love the, if I weren't married, I go, you'd what? Put your order in and see if I take it. Like what? Just because you'd be single doesn't mean I'd be interested. Also, thanks for flirting with me.
Yeah, it's inappropriate.
You just crossed so many boundaries.
Yeah, that's really funny. I think I do think that these things are insidious. So one thing that I have launched on the solo page of petermcgraw.org is a new message board. And so what I invite listeners to do is to share some of the anti-single rhetoric that they've experienced and especially share their comebacks to those. The one I haven't nailed yet is just one, when you go up to a restaurant and it's just you being seated.
I love that one.
And I still haven't nailed the perfect response to that, but I'm working on it. At some point, I will.
Do we want to spitball some ideas right here?
Well, let's save it for the message board. But I do think that that's going to be some deliberate thinking that is going to crack that nut, so to speak. But I usually say, "Oh, I'm going to be plenty." Ah, well done. You've given this much more thought than I have.
That's good. That's good.
I'm just quick, and I also feel like the world is trying to make me smaller than I am, and I've got 5 2 3/4 on me. I'm going to take up as much space as I pay for. I pay my taxes.
Yes, and hence the guest co-hosting and the return of Lily Rains. Are there any do you have any others that really bother you, Christina, in terms of the sort of anti-single rhetoric, or is that the big one?
Oh no! Oh, I've got a lot.
Okay, can you give us one more?
Yeah. Okay. I will choose. Let's see. Oh, you know what? The one that I really like, as in I don't like it, is oh, you're going to grow. It's kind of a combo. You're going to grow old, alone, and you're going to be bitter. And so that one, that's obviously ad hominem attack, name calling, substitutes abuse for evidence. And then, you're in denial, you're defensive. That's, hasty generalization fallacy. So where, they assume something about you that they really have no way. No one can tell whether I'm in denial or I'm happy single or not, except for me. That's called hasty generalization fallacy. How come you hate men? How come you don't like gay marriage? People will leap to these conclusions if I say, I have some issues with the way marriage is privileged in our society. Well, why don't you like gay marriage? I'm like, whoa, wait. How did you get there? And that's called a complex question fallacy, where, the definition of that, I have a note here, relies on a problematic assumption, and it forces the recipient of the statement to make a choice that either way puts me in an uncomfortable position. I'm not against gay marriage just because I think marriage is overprivileged in our society. Yeah. But it puts me in a really uncomfortable position to have to answer that kind of a statement. Nice. I've got so many of them.
I'll give you mine that I get. I think there's some gender differences with some of these. I think women get a lot more of these than men do. I think there's different assumptions also about when a man versus a woman, at least sort of traditional stereotypes I'm speaking from right now, chooses to be single. Some of it is, like you said, for a woman she's bitter, she's angry, she's these things. And the man, he's not willing to grow up. He's a womanizer. These things split in different ways. I'll give you two quick ones. Actually, another one comes to mind. And I would say this, they don't always have mean intentions. So one of them I get is, Pete, I worry about you. I worry that you're going to grow old alone and you're just going to have anyone there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, I have so many friends. I have such rich connections. I'm going to have, I was like, I worry about you. You've put all your cards in one other person. What if they die first? Well, you're going to be in the same boat as me, except you're not going to have the friends. So I'm not sure you should be worried about me. Let's worry about you.
So the other one, can I just say which fallacy that one is?
Yes, of course.
That's the, in my opinion, that's the appeal to fear fallacy, where it gets truthiness by adding sheer scariness. So, I'm worried about you. You never know what could happen. Mm-hmm. That's where it gets its truthiness from. Appeal to fear. Yeah. Yes.
The other one is, it usually happens if I meet someone and I tell them I'm not interested in having a family. I'm not interested in getting married. And it goes something like this, like, I really want to understand why you don't want to get married. Will you explain this to me? This is puzzling to me. And I always say, I'm happy to talk it through, but I just want to point out, imagine that you said to me, I really want to get married. And I just said, I'm just so puzzled by this decision. Will you please explain to me why you would want to get married? Because I just don't understand it. And, it feels like a one-way conversation where the person who doesn't want to get married has to explain it, and the person who does want to gets married, it's just what's there to explain in that way. Okay, so
I have only quippy retorts to all of these.
Please, Lily, we need you. The world
Why
needs
are you going to be, you're going to grow old and bitter. I'd much rather be solo and bitter for my choices throughout my life than married and bitter because of one choice I made.
You are a natural at this. My goodness.
What's the other thing? If you're, oh God, I don't understand. How could you not want to have children? Or how could you not want to be married? And I say, well, of the people that I've met, I would not want to spend the rest of my life with any of them. Yeah. Number one. Number two, explain to me why you would want to have children. Mm-hmm. And please give examples.
As a quick aside, I think, we're in a very unusual time as we're taping this with COVID and quarantines and so on. I think that some of this rhetoric is going to go down. I think there's a lot of people who have been forced to reckon with the quality of their relationship and the decisions that they have made, that in some ways they're like, I don't envy solos because they don't have someone to lean on. And then others are like, boy, I would like to be on my own right now. And so some of this, I think, may go down just because people are forced to really reckon with the gravity of some of their life choices because of this situation.
100%. Plus, people are getting divorced after this.
Oh, I'm going to double my listeners very, very quickly, I think.
We're going to have a solo cruise. Everyone will just quarantine together off the coast of Cabo.
So
in the past,
what's that?
In the past, people have given me pitying comments and pitying looks when I said I live alone. And I'm struggling because every day I feel bad for my coupled friends and my friends with kids. And I don't want to be that person who is pitying someone else for their situation or their life choices. But yet I kind of am that person right now. So I feel a little conflicted about that. Because I think living alone is such a privilege for me. And, right.
Well, I think that's a thoughtful way to think about it, Christina. To me, the issue is I think these are important topics to talk about, and it's important because it's illustrative. It points out, what is the saying about, the fish who says to the other fish, "Oh, the water's really nice today," and the other fish goes, "What's water?" And I think that we live in a world where a lot of people think they don't realize that we're surrounded by this particular type of water. And so I think that pointing out the differential benefits and the annoying anti-singles rhetoric and so on is important to do. I have to admit that me personally will only take that so far, and because I think I also enjoy the saying about the best revenge is living well. And one of the best ways to I think help reduce the stigma that single people feel in the world is to elevate singleness. That is to bring it on par with marriage. I'm not anti-marriage. I'm pro-single in the sense that I think some people absolutely should be married. And I think that they should have children. I think it's the best path that they could ever walk in the world. I think that marriage happens to be overprescribed. And so then there's a group of people who would be better living a life like the three of us than they would have trying to fit into this other in this other world. And for me, solo is designed to be uplifting. It's a focus on the positive in a way that is inspirational to people, that they feel willing to deviate. And this is a good segue into a previous episode that Christina, I believe you wrote an article about, which is Are Single People Cool? So I had Caleb Warren, who's my co-creator of the benign violation theory and my fellow co-author of almost all the academic work that I've done on humor. Well, he has this whole other area of expertise on coolness. He has the theory of coolness. And we had this incredible conversation in which we try to answer the question, are single people cool? Hint, hint, yes, in some circumstances. And it's this idea of you make the choice to be single. So losers who want to be partnered and can't be partnered aren't cool singles. It's the folks who decide that this is the path that they want to walk, that they're going to go against the grain, and as a result they get opportunities, and in my vernacular, to live a remarkable life. But Christina, I really enjoyed and I appreciated your thoughtful response to this.
Sure, thank
to this
you.
episode. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So Well, first off, one of my issues when people talk about being a positive single and like you term it living a remarkable life is it seems there's a certain pressure on single people to be super remarkable in order to compensate for their quote unquote deviant lifestyle or their compensate for not having a partner. And that kind of bothers me a little bit. And when I was listening to our Singles Cool episode, it got me thinking because I think you or Caleb made a comment like, well, single sitting alone on the couch doing nothing, that's not necessarily cool. And, I don't really think it's that cool either. But then I started thinking, I sit on the couch a lot and I have certain, physical issues where, I am required to sit on the couch a lot. And I would like to think about a way to make sitting on the couch doing nothing cool, even if you are unpartnered. Okay. How can you create that cool aura around someone who doesn't necessarily go out and travel and volunteer and do a bunch of fabulous stuff, but is single?
Yeah. No, I don't think we should conflate coolness with living a good life. I think that sitting on the couch can be a good life. It's about matching your behaviors and your preferences.
Because the podcast, you guys did talk about, the things that really do make a remarkable life, like being true to yourself, being true to your values. You guys went through a whole list of those, which I also mentioned in the post.
Yeah. But it is a thoughtful response. And it is interesting. I do think that people should be motivated not by impressing the world with how great they are, but rather living the life that makes them great. And I have a colleague back at the University of Colorado. He's a solo and he doesn't travel. He's like, I've traveled enough in my life. I don't like planes. Sure. I like to be home with my dogs. I like my walks. I like my football. I like my wine. And in some ways, that kind of makes him cool in the sense that he doesn't care what the world thinks is the way he should be taking advantage of his resources and so on. Like he owns his life in a way that makes him happy. Now, if I lived his life, it wouldn't work for me. But that's the beauty of all of this is that none of this stuff is a one-size-fits-all model that someone else can tell you what the best approach is.
I think it would be nice if we could have a world where single people didn't need so much self-confidence in order to accept their own personal life choices. Where we didn't have to say, I don't care what anybody thinks because I'm awesome. Because that takes a certain amount of emotional energy to have that self-confidence to say, I don't care what the world thinks.
But also, that's also just because you're not married or you're solo doesn't mean you don't have a community of people around you that reflect back
Correct.
All the wonderful things that you have going for you, right? And that coolness factor, I think it transcends marital status. Someone who is courageous, authentic, that greatness shows up in people who are married, people who are single, people who are solo, whatever you want to call them. So the cool factor transcends. It's just a matter of society, like, instinctively feeling bad for you because nobody else wanted to marry you.
I like the way you put that, instinctively feeling bad for you. I like that.
Yeah, that's the water metaphor that we're getting.
Which is privilege, right? We're talking about that so much in the last couple months, is if you didn't even know this was water, you don't even know you're privileged. Mm-hmm. So how do you engage in the dialogue to introduce water to the very fish who's breathing it?
Yes. The one thing I want to end with, and then we're going to wrap up, but we're going to come back. We're going to have a bonus session, and this is a good time, I think, to talk about the bonus material. Is Christina, you have a sort of series on your blog about great singles. or what I might call remarkable singles. And so we're going to cover one of those remarkable singles, someone I guarantee you don't know, Lily. It's not going to be the usual suspects, one of the usual suspects. But this harkens back to the beginning of this, where someone might say, you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you start to point out the prejudice and even discrimination that single people have. And the more woke members of the table might say to you, all right, I buy it, but it doesn't compare to the other isms. It doesn't compare to the sexism you face, Lily, or the racism that you face, Joe, or the heterosexism that you face, and so on, right? That in the list of isms,
all
it's
of it,
kind of, it's closer to the bottom than it is to the top, kind of thing. And I really like your response to that. When people make that argument, Christina, how do you react to that? Do you sigh like that?
So I guess if I have time to think about it, in my ideal world, I would probably say, like I said to you when we were emailing before, Martin Luther King's quote, discrimination anywhere is discrimination everywhere. Something like that. I can't remember his exact words.
It's injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Yes, injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. So, or is right, what Peter said. Anyway, when singles advocates are talking about the discrimination based on marital status or romantic status, we're never saying that singlism is as bad as racism or sexism or heterosexism. We're never saying that, but a lot of times we get accused of saying that, and that's one of those complex question logical fallacies again, where we're like, wait, no, slow down. How did you make that logical leap? So we're not saying that, but I do feel that singlism bleeds over and creates an environment where sexism can be worse, where racism can be worse. And you had Chris Marsh on your show?
I'm going to. She's a scheduled guest. Yes. Did
you have her? Right. And so she's written about people of color, specifically women of color, I believe, who live alone. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? And so she could talk more about how singlism bleeds into racism. I'm not really qualified to speak about that.
Sure.
But I do know it bleeds into sexism, just because single women have historically been punished for being single much more vehemently than men have.
Indeed.
And then, singlism bleeds into ableism also, just because people who live alone don't have all the resources. And if you have a disabled person, there's pressure on them to couple up. There's also problems where disabled people can gain or lose health insurance if their marital status changes. They can gain or lose their disability privileges. It just bleeds over into all of the other isms.
Mm-hmm. I have a personal story about this that I think is relevant. I wasn't aware of the Martin Luther King quote, but it hit home because it reminded me of a story. My pre-academic life, I worked in student affairs. So I was a resident advisor for a dormitory, taking care of a floor, and then I became a hall director as a grad assistant, and then I used that career path to move to UC Santa Barbara in 1994 and to be a professional hall director at age 24. And one of the really great experiences that I had was the housing program there. Even though most of the students were white and largely upper middle class, the program was very focused on diversity and inclusion. I mean, this is 1994. It was a central tenet of this program. And that was reflected in the hiring practices. It was reflected in the programming and so on. And so one of those years of the 6 professional hall directors, I was the only straight white man of those 6. And I remember a very uncomfortable staff meeting in which the gay hall directors, which there were two, and the black hall directors, which there were three, had a debate about who has it worse in terms of the isms. And this was, as you can imagine, a spirited conversation and a passionate one, given people's experiences, both personal and professional. And to the credit of the housing department, they brought in a speaker to talk to everyone, not just the hall directors and the assistants, but also all of the resident assistants and so on. And I wish I could remember the person's name, but she spoke about this idea. She spoke about oppression and about the mechanisms of oppression. And that if you buy into, I remember this, I'll never forget her saying this. She said, if you buy into one form of oppression, you need to buy into all forms of oppression, because they all have the same roots in ignorance and in power, and so on. And so what I like about that idea is that, this is not scorekeeping. This is oppression, in a sense. And maybe it's more mild and maybe it's more major, but it's still that. It still holds people back from recognizing their complete and full potential. And it hurts them emotionally. It sometimes hurts them physically. It disadvantages people. And anytime that there's something that is systematic that disadvantages people, we should be fighting it as people who care about hegemony. And so I think that was a very nice reminder, that quote, about the importance of this, especially nowadays, as we're seeing this, the issues and people becoming more active politically and so on. And so I really appreciate your perspective on that and reminding me of that really powerful idea that sits with me 25 years later.
Absolutely.
I think it comes to a place of, there are a million ways to be not white. There are a million ways to be not cisgendered, not heterosexual.
There are more ways to be not than there are
correct.
To be. Yes, that's a good, well said.
Now, the thing that we cannot argue is that people aren't getting killed in the street because they're known to be single.
Yes, that's right.
And so that's where there is a bit of a stratification, right? Like, which house is on fire? Let's put that one out.
Yes.
But it is interesting that when you talk about the human experience of it, that is what connects all of us.
Well,
that is,
yeah. I think I'm sorry. I have to say I did an analysis in a previous episode about divorce. So this is the point that I think Chris Marsh is very interested in, and I look forward to exploring it with you, is like the probability that you get divorced, that you become solo, is affected by a host of variables. Your socioeconomic status, most notably, but another one is race. And so, and because those tend to correlate. And so, with this idea of you then have multiple forms of oppression that start to build on each other. This is the point I think Christina was making earlier. And so they can tend to intersect. Because now you not only are just fighting oppression because of your race, but now you're fighting it because you've lost a bunch of benefits that you would have had otherwise. And you probably need those benefits more than anyone if you're in in a low income person of color household.
Exactly.
So,
yes.
Yeah. Now, I think we should probably, I wish I could wrap up on a more uplifting note, but I think that this is a sobering topic and the audience can handle that.
I have a fun question for
Please.
Christina.
Yes, please.
Christina, my
Yes.
new best friend. Are there, without getting anyone in trouble, are there any blog topics that you have wanted to write about, but have not, either because of timing with, politics or the global pandemic, Or if you're like, I don't have enough evidence to prove one point or the other, anything taboo, something that you were afraid to talk about because maybe you had a friend that you knew would read it and this was totally inspired by them.
Oh, interesting. I ended up writing about a friend who told me I was going to be bitter. I had tried to point out an instance of singlism to her. She told me I was going to grow old and bitter and alone, and she was worried about me. Circle back to what Peter said, everyone says to, or a lot of people say to him. And I ended up cutting her out of my life, not solely because of that, but that was one of the instigating factors. And then I wrote about it on the blog. But at that point, we were no longer friends, and she didn't read Onely anyway because, she wasn't really into the topic. So, but as for, I can't really think of any other examms of things.
That's pretty big. That's pretty about. Big ovaries on that one. You're like, I'm cutting you out and I'm writing about you.
That was not the only reason, but it was just sort of opened my eyes to the way she was and how we just saw too many things differently.
I'm going to compliment Onely because I think it's a really nice resource, and I do feel like it doesn't hold back.
Thank you.
I feel it doesn't pull punches. And, the orientation, I think like Onely and a podcast like this are nice compliments, right? Like one's, I'm going to use a bad metaphor, so I'm going to skip it. But it has a nice 1-2 punch that goes along with it. I'm going to end with a question that I've had my married listeners ask me, and this is for both of you, and that is, I'm happily married, but Pete, boy, you've changed my perspective, and I want to be more supportive of my single friends and my single family members and my single coworkers. How do I do that?
I think just educate yourself how to recognize these common microaggressions that are levied against single people. And when you see people doing them to other people or talking about mutual single friends of yours, just flag it and say, hey, actually, that's not the most supportive thing to say about this friend of ours. Or just, I guess, being an ally to anybody, you just want to do your reading and your research and find out what the problematic behaviors are and call them out when you see them in a gentle and supportive way to the perpetrators so you don't alienate the perpetrator of the singlism. That's a pretty general answer.
But this is similar to a white person chastising another white person for being bigoted.
Yeah, and, chastising... I mean, again, I don't want to say that fighting singlism is anything near to the degree that is required for fighting racism. So I'm not saying that, but it is similar to that dynamic where one white person might tell the other white person, "Hey, that's not really the way you should be thinking," or you shouldn't really say that.
Yeah, I mean, this one particular friend actually used the term ally, which we use for, gay, lesbian, transsexual, queer populations, right? For where heterosexual people are an ally and then behave in ways that an ally would. Lily?
I feel like more conversations are always more helpful. You plant seeds, you get a chance to experiment with language and witnessing the way that you're received, and you never know what seeds you planted and what got watered and who planted something before. But I do have to say that there's a rule in improv, which is only speak to the people that are right here. You never know, it's not about gossiping. It's about you never know other people's circumstances, and you can only deal with the people who are making decisions in this room right now. So let's assume that you're opening your awareness that there are a million ways to be in or out of relationship, which means you have roommates and you can't be on the phone late at night, or you live in an old building, or you have kids, or you have a commute, or you have a partner, or you're getting divorced, or someone just passed away. There are so many different factors at play in any given room with people. just trust that everyone's making the best decisions for themselves and their circumstances, and afford them the opportunity to make those choices. Mm-hmm. So don't just assume that it's Thanksgiving and everyone's going to be with family, right? It's like even mental health and suicide awareness around the holidays has started happening in the last, like more prominently in the last 5 years. And that suicide affects people who are married and people who are solo. Mm-hmm. So just because you're married doesn't mean you're happily married. And just because you're solo doesn't mean you're unhappily solo. Mm-hmm. I really think having more questions, asking more questions, going with curiosity, and just speaking to the people that are in front of you.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to end with that note and say we'll return in a moment. If you want to stick around, we're going to learn about this remarkable single. But this is the end of the episode officially. So Lily, thank you.
Bye, episode. Bye.
Thank you for coming back again.
I love you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
It's great. And Christina, thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
I do hope you enjoy your time on the couch.
Oh, I do. I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. So great to talk with you.
Lily. It was nice to talk to you guys.
Cheers. Welcome back. Doing a little bonus material. I love the bonus material. I don't always do it. Eventually, I'm going to be moving the bonus material into the message boards. And but for now, enjoy it while it's still available to everyone. So welcome back, Christina. Welcome back, Lily. We're going to talk Peter. About a remarkable single. So as part of the Onely blog, onely.org, you have this series of remarkable singles, and I was scrolling through them and reading them, and one of them stood out to me, and I'm going to mess up the name, so I'll apologize for that, but I'll put the link in the exhibits, and her name is Umi Suda. That's my guess. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about this amazing solo.
Sure. So First of all, I just want to caveat this with everything I'm telling you now, I'm getting from this book that I read, this amazing book, Daughters of the Samurai by Janice P. Nomura.
I'll put it in the exhibits. Good.
Yeah. And so everything I'm telling you is coming from that. I was reading this book, and it's basically about these three Japanese girls in the late 1800s Japan who were recruited by the government, or basically told by their families in the government that they were going to go and be educated in the U.S. and come back to Japan as young adults and impart whatever knowledge they gained in their Western education to Japan. So putting aside just sort of the possible problematic nature of this, importing colonialist attitudes and whatnot, and the idea that, these women had to go to the U.S. to acquire some knowledge that they needed to bring back to Japan. You could argue that that's a little bit problematic from our perspective today. But anyway, at the time, both governments agreed they were going to have this kind of one-way exchange, and then the three women would return to Japan and share their Western knowledge. And so actually, I think it was 5 girls initially, but only 3 ended up staying. And of the 3 girls, the youngest was Ume, and she was so young that when they grew up in the States, she lost her Japanese language. The other 2 remembered how to speak Japanese. So the 3 of them, when they were very young adults, went back to Japan. And the 2 older ones still remembered how to speak Japanese, so they had that advantage. Ume did not remember how to speak Japanese. And she was also different from the 2 other girls, or women at this point, in the fact that she decided when she went back to Japan, she did not want to get married. She wanted to stay single and be a teacher and share her Western education with young Japanese students. and teach them English, and mostly it was ended up being English. But so the book is about these three women's stories when they were growing up in the States. And this is in the 1800s in the US, and then in the late 1800s when they went back to Japan. And throughout the book, you kind of see Ume's struggle as she tries to accomplish this dream she set for herself, which is to return to Japan and teach and share the things she's learned in her education as an American in Japan, which is what she was sort of meant to do from a very young age. And she wanted to accomplish this by not getting married and starting her own school. And throughout the book, you can see her writing letters back to her friends in the States and just saying, you know, I had no idea it was going to be so difficult to stay single over here in Japan. And she gives examples of different discriminatory attitudes that she faces. And she even, her two friends who were raised in the States with her end up getting married because they were financially and socio-culturally, it was just really their only options. And she stuck it out and she stayed single her entire life. And she ended up establishing a school and becoming very well renowned and having meetings with the Empress or audiences with the Empress. And ended up being very successful, but it was a struggle for her. And I felt a little strange writing this post about Ume Tsuda because, you know, I'm writing from the perspective as an American in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what it was like to be an American in the 1800s or to be a Japanese person, a Japanese woman in the 1800s. I can only take what I know about singlism here and now and apply it to Ume's life back in the States and back in Japan, back in those days. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there that, you know, talking about singlism in 1800s US and 1800s Japan is very different from what I do on One Lee. But I was just impressed with the tenacity of Ume and how she just kept going.
Well, it's striking.
I can read some excerpts if you want, or we can talk about it. I've been talking for a while now.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think tenacity is a good word choice for this because I think. So just to counter this, there's a previous episode. I'm such an episode dropper, name dropper, but there's one that I did of people.
My name's Peter. Have you heard my podcast?
I can't help it. I'm so proud of this. So we have one about
it's
people.
Your baby, Peter. It's your baby.
It's true. It is. I care a lot about. Look, I'm going to say this again. I wish I had this podcast when I was 25. I wish I had it when I was 35.
100%.
You know, and so it's the resources that I wish I had as a younger man who was questioning these things. You know, first mildly and then later majorly. But there's an episode about people who should never have married. And the criteria that we used was if they were alive today, would they have not married? And I think what's striking about that premise is that the pressure to do it was so strong that nearly everyone did it, even though it wasn't in their best interest. And so people sacrificed what was in their best interest because of the pressure. And so when someone in the 1800s, a woman in the 1800s was able to resist this kind of pressure, that's incredible to me. And so it's worthwhile highlighting this. And in some ways it's also heartening. It shows how far we've come. And so
yes,
the hope is that 200 years from now, people will make fun of this podcast. Right? In the sense of like, wow, boy, geez, they needed a podcast like this? Gee, that seems so out of date.
This is the equivalent. This podcast will be the equivalent of rinse, repeat, do not drink on the back of a shampoo bottle. Who the fuck needs that instruction?
Let's hope, right? Let's hope. Yeah. Well, that's super. Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you to Lily and Christina for sharing your time. This is a nice, tight bonus material this time. And jump on the message boards, people.
And I really do want to recommend that book.
And it's called Daughters of the Samurai. Yes.
By Janice P. Nomura. Really fascinating.
Fabulous.
Bookshop.org, guys. You know about this, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Bookshop.org. All right, you two, go forth and keep the message up.
Thanks, Peter. This was great.
It was super fun.
Thank you.
It's good
Bye,
to see
everybody.
you. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.com. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.